Congressman Paul, what's been your experience with businessmen who come to Washington to lobby? Is it lobbying for a freer market and open competition, or are they looking for protection from competition?
I would say that 9 times out of 10 at least they're looking for government assistance, and that's sort of sad because most of them are in the conservative camp. They'll come in and they'll say, you know, I want the budget balance, I'm pleased with you voting against big spending, and we don't want to have any more welfare programs. But then they'll say, oh, by the way, you know, this program that I'm interested in, I support. So I would say that businessmen are careless, if nothing else. And I think they've been conditioned and taught. It's not that they're evil in the sense that they're, you know, deliberately trying to get disadvantaged, but I think they've been taught that a little bit of government intervention is beneficial, and they rationalize very easily and say, boy, this one I can understand. You know, if I have a subsidized loan in my industry, this is going to be helpful to me. And I think they're just very, very careless. And unfortunately, I see many business people as part of the problem. So I don't always see it on the welfare side, the person who wants food stamps or something else. That to me is a problem, and our federal government at least should never be involved in that. But as far as the businessman go, he's always looking for protection. One of the key areas that is very frustrating that we're dealing with in the Congress all the time is the foreign aid. Businessmen are frequently for foreign aid and subsidies to international banks because they say it's good for business. And they're precisely right. It's good for their business. And they said, yeah, but it helps my workers, and it helps my contractors, and it helps the business people that I buy my products from. And they rationalize and say, well, it's really good for business. But what they don't realize is that every dollar that they get allocated to them through foreign aid to a certain government, they have to take that from somebody else. And they never ask the question, who was hurt for them to benefit? And this, to me, is very frustrating that the businessman supports those views.
Well, when we talk about antitrust laws and monopoly, we generally talk about businesses. Can we also talk about unions when we talk about this? Do unions, in a sense, have a monopoly power? And should we have antitrust laws to try to keep control over unions?
Well, I think we have to be clear on the source of monopoly power. If the source of monopoly power is government restricting competition or restricting entry, then sure, unions are monopolistic. Because the Wagner Act, the Norris-LaGuardia Act, the creation of the NLRB, all of those things, all of those pieces of legislation restrict competition between workers and give unions an artificial position that they probably would not achieve in an open free market. On the other hand, I don't want to apply the antitrust laws to unions as some political conservatives would do. The antitrust laws have not worked in a practical fashion applied to business. We ought not to apply those same laws, which are unjust, arbitrary, unfair, non-practical, to labor unions. So labor enjoys an exemption from the antitrust laws under the Clayton Act, Section 14. I support that exemption. I don't support labor union monopoly. I would repeal the Norris-LaGuardia Act. I would repeal the National Labor Relations Act, 1936.
So you'd have competing unions, in a sense. In a market situation, you could have competing unions.
Sure, I support unions. Yeah. Right, voluntary unions, absolutely.
Okay, so what you're saying then is if in a market you had a strong union developed because they were a good union and they provided the services for business, and they were still free entry, and they got the contract and they had like a voluntary closed shop. That is, you would see no reason that we would have to have any laws to prohibit that, to prohibit the closed shop, as long as there's free entry so that another union can come in and compete with that union to get that contract.
That's right. I'm against the closed shop. Right. I'm against laws that would restrict prohibit the closed shop.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, I do, but it's a very difficult problem today because we literally benefit by the right to work laws in Texas because the states that don't have it suffer the abusive power of unions. And look at where the unemployment was in a recent recession in the states that did not have right to work laws. And yet I disagree with that approach, but that's compensated to some degree the evils of union power developed with government protection. But I would accept a big union that would have a closed shop, and I would not outlaw them if the free market were allowed to operate.
Well, I'd like to get back to the problem we touched on before, is if these laws are unnecessary and harmful, and if regulation brings about less competition, why isn't there more enthusiasm for repealing them, or what can be done to, is it a question of education?
Well, I think it is a question of education. 85% of the economists recently polled said they still support the rigorous enforcement of the antitrust laws. So even though for the last 10 years some of us have been out screaming in the woods about how the laws work in an anti-competitive way, nonetheless 85% of my fellow professionals still believe that the laws are good and are pro-consumer. So I think part of it definitely is an educational effort. But education is not enough. You then have to carry through those educational ideas at the policy level and move against these policies. And I think you have to do more than make administrative changes. I mean, William Baxter, who is the antitrust chief right now, has moved a long way towards reforming the antitrust laws. He's gotten a lot of the junk out, and a lot of the important cases that are bad cases have been dropped away. But I think we must go beyond that, because what happens when Baxter is replaced or leaves office? I can see us easily slipping back into the 60s and 70s kind of antitrust cases where we're prosecuting firms that are efficient because they're efficient.
Is there much sentiment? Well, more than that, you said about 95% of your colleagues probably would not favor repeal. Have you found that with the current administration, while there's been a change of sorts, that it's not something that's going to last in the years to come?
Well, I really don't think it will, because I think that unfortunately we make progress and then we slip back, because I've been lobbied very, very strenuously to try to reverse some of the effects of deregulation of the airlines. There have been some who have been very upset with it. They don't like this competition, and it's usually from a business level. I've not had a consumer that ever came in and said that they have objected to the lower fares and the more choices they have in airlines. So the consumer is being protected. So I'm always afraid that the people that come here to Washington have a greater influence, and yet they don't represent the majority of the people in this country. I think that it's unfortunate that our educational efforts aren't more effective, and that we can motivate the average guy on the street to write in and say, look, I'm for competition because I know in a competitive economy the consumer is the king.
I hate to interrupt, but I'm afraid we're out of time for today. Congressman Paul and I want to thank Professor Armentano for joining us for this discussion of antitrust and monopoly. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion and that you'll join us again 2 weeks from tonight for another conversation with Congressman Ron Paul.